The Denver International Airport was alive with its usual energy, boarding calls echoing across terminals, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with jet fuel, and the constant shuffle of rolling suitcases. Among the sea of travelers, David Miller stood quietly with his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, her tiny hand clasped tightly in his. David didn't look like a man of means. His jeans were faded, his jacket frayed at the cuffs, and his sneakers bore the wear of long workdays at the auto repair shop where he made just enough to get by. Yet his face carried a quiet strength. His dark hair was a little unkempt, his jaw rough with stubble, but his brown eyes softened every time they landed on Lily. This trip meant more than just a vacation. It was their first big journey together since Lily's mother, Sarah, had passed away 3 years ago. David had worked double shifts and saved every spare dollar for months to take Lily to Florida, where she could finally see the ocean she dreamed of. "Daddy," Lily asked, tugging on his hand as they stood in the boarding line, "do you think the ocean will be as big as in the movies?" David smiled, crouching to her level. "Bigger, sweetheart, so big you can't even see the end of it." Her face lit up. Wow. When they boarded, they found their seats in row 22 by the wing. David carefully stowed Lily's unicorn backpack in the overhead bin, then helped her buckle in. She leaned against the window, her nose almost pressed to the glass, excitement dancing in her eyes. A moment later, a tall man in a sharp navy suit stepped into the row across the aisle. His polished shoes clicked against the floor, his Rolex glimmered under the cabin lights, and his assistant trailed behind, burdened with bags. The man moved with the kind of entitlement that didn't bend for anyone. This was Richard Carlton, CEO of Carlton & Myers Investments, a multi-million-dollar firm based in New York. Normally, Richard flew private, sipping champagne at 40,000 feet with no interruptions. But when his jet experienced unexpected maintenance issues, he was forced onto this commercial flight, a fact he considered a personal tragedy. He glanced at David, who was helping Lily settle in with her coloring book. Richard's lips twisted into a smirk. "Great. A daycare on board," he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. David ignored the comment, focusing on Lily. Richard wasn't finished. He leaned back, crossing his legs. "No offense, buddy, but maybe book the bus next time. Some of us actually need peace and quiet to work." Lily frowned and looked at her dad. David gave her a gentle smile, though he could feel his jaw tightening. "She won't bother you," he said softly. Richard chuckled. "Sure, I just don't understand why single dads think dragging their kids on flights is cute. Probably living off alimony or some government handout." The words stung, but David kept his composure. He'd heard worse in life, and he wasn't about to let this arrogant stranger ruin Lily's excitement. He pulled out a small puzzle book, distracting her with a game of word search. "Why was that man mean, Daddy?" Lily whispered when Richard leaned back into his laptop. David kissed the top of her head. "Because he doesn't know us, sweetheart. That's all." The plane soon taxied and lifted into the clear Colorado sky. For the first hour, the flight was uneventful. Drinks were served, the hum of the engine steady. Lily giggled at her coloring pages while David occasionally glanced out at the endless clouds. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently. Drinks spilled, trays rattled, and a chorus of gasps filled the cabin. The seatbelt sign dinged on as the aircraft rocked with turbulence. "Daddy," Lily cried, clutching his arm. "It's okay, baby," David assured her, though his own heart thumped harder. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are experiencing a technical malfunction. Our first officer is currently communicating with air traffic control as we assess the situation." Passengers exchanged anxious glances. Some prayed under their breath, others tried to soothe crying children. Richard rolled his eyes, muttering, "Typical. Commercial junk. Should have waited for the jet." But minutes later, the cabin door opened, and the captain himself stepped into the aisle. His face was pale, his forehead damp with sweat. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath as he spoke. "Attention, everyone. We have an urgent situation. Our autopilot system has failed, and," he swallowed, his voice cracking, "our first officer has become unresponsive due to a sudden medical emergency. I need immediate assistance in the cockpit. Is there anyone on board with fighter pilot or advanced flight experience?" A stunned silence followed. Passengers looked around, whispering nervously. Some shook their heads. A woman asked if her husband, who once flew crop dusters, would qualify, but the captain gently shook his head. Richard suddenly stood, straightening his tie. "Well, I'm a CEO. I manage thousands of employees, billions of dollars. If you need leadership, I'm your guy." The captain's expression hardened. "Sir, with respect, I don't need a businessman. I need someone who can land this aircraft." Laughter rippled nervously through the cabin. Richard's cheeks flushed crimson as he slumped back into his seat. David's pulse raced. His mind flooded with memories. The roar of jet engines, the G-force pressing against his chest, the endless hours training cadets in simulators. He had buried that part of his life, choosing fatherhood over the Air Force after Sarah's death. But now, the choice was staring him in the face again. He looked at Lily. Her small hands clutched his arm, her wide eyes shimmering with fear. "Daddy," she whispered. David squeezed her hand. He had always promised Sarah he'd keep their daughter safe. This was no time to stay silent. Slowly, he rose from his seat. "Captain," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the stunned cabin. "Name's David Miller, former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, 10 years service. I've flown F-16s and trained younger pilots. I can help you." The captain's relief was immediate. "Thank God. Please, come with me." Gasps spread. Passengers turned to stare. Lily sat up straighter, pride flickering through her fear. Richard blinked in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. That guy, a mechanic." The captain spun toward Richard, his patience gone. "That man just might save your life, sir. Sit down." David placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Stay here, sweetheart. Daddy has to help the pilot. I'll be back. Promise," she whispered. "I promise." He walked past Richard, who sat gaping, speechless for the first time in years. The captain opened the cockpit door, and David stepped inside. The heavy door closed behind him, leaving the passengers buzzing in anxious whispers. Lily hugged her unicorn backpack close, whispering to herself, "Daddy's a hero." And at 30,000 feet above America's heartland, the fate of everyone on board now rested in the hands of the single dad the CEO had mocked. The cockpit was a storm of flashing lights, urgent alarms, and the steady roar of engines. The captain slid back into his seat, motioning for David to take the company pilot's chair. "Autopilot's gone. First officer collapsed 20 minutes ago. Medics are tending to him in the back," the captain explained quickly. "We're running manual, but she's heavy, sluggish. Controls feel off." David strapped in, his hands instinctively moving over the instruments. It had been years since he'd touched a cockpit like this, but the muscle memory came rushing back. He scanned the dials, his mind switching into pilot mode. "Hydraulics are compromised," David muttered. "She's still responsive, but not forgiving." The captain gave him a sharp look. "You've done this before, haven't you?" David nodded. 10 years Air Force, F-16s. Taught younger pilots before I left." Relief washed over the captain's face. "Then thank God you're here." David adjusted the yoke. The plane tilted slightly, passengers murmuring nervously in the cabin. "We'll need an emergency landing. Closest runway." The captain grabbed the radio. "Kansas City International. Air traffic controls clearing as priority." David exhaled slowly, gripping the controls. He wasn't just flying a machine, he was flying a promise. A promise to Lily that he'd always keep her safe. Dash dash dash. In the cabin, word spread quickly. Whispers passed row to row. The quiet single dad was a fighter pilot. The same man Richard had mocked was now their only hope. Lily clutched her unicorn backpack to her chest, whispering, "Daddy can do it." Richard, meanwhile, sat stiff in his seat, pale and sweating. His assistant leaned toward him. "Sir, maybe you should apologize later." Richard snapped, "Don't be ridiculous. He's just a..." His voice trailed off as another jolt rocked the plane, reminding him just how powerless he was. Dash dash dash. Back in the cockpit, David's voice was steady as he adjusted flaps and trim. "She's nose heavy. I'll need manual flare control on landing. Captain, run checklist for hydraulic failure." The captain flipped switches, reading off steps. David responded with calm precision, hands moving confidently. His mind sharpened, every nerve alive. Then came the storm clouds. Dark gray towers loomed ahead, lightning flashing inside them like the heart of a giant. The captain cursed. Weather's closing in. David tightened his grip. We can't go around. Too little fuel. We thread the gap and pray she holds. The plane shuddered as they hit turbulence. Overhead bins rattled. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks dangled briefly before retracting. In row 22, Lily shut her eyes tight and whispered, "Daddy's got this." Dash dash dash. The approach. Runway in sight, the captain announced, pointing to a strip of lights breaking through the storm clouds. David's knuckles whitened on the controls. Brace for a rough one. The descent was bumpy, the plane fighting them. Warning alarms blared. Altitude dropped too fast. David eased the nose up, compensating. His jaw clenched with focus, sweat dripping down his temple. "Easy," he muttered. "Easy." At 500 feet, the left wing dipped. Gasps erupted from the cabin. David fought the yoke, muscles straining, correcting the angle just in time. "Hold together, baby," he whispered to the aircraft, as if speaking to Lily herself. The wheels screeched against the wet runway, bouncing once, twice, before catching. The plane roared as David and the captain slammed the brakes. Rain sprayed, engines screamed, the metal beast shuddered violently, until, finally, it slowed to a grinding halt. Silence. Then cheers. Applause erupted, people crying, hugging strangers. Flight attendants wept with relief. In row 22, Lily beamed, clapping her little hands. "That's my daddy," she shouted proudly. Dash dash dash. The aftermath. When the doors opened, emergency vehicles surrounded the plane. Paramedics rushed to care for the unconscious first officer. Passengers slowly disembarked, some kissing the ground, others shaking David's hand as they passed. David emerged from the cockpit to a sea of grateful faces. Strangers patted his back, thanking him, calling him a hero. But his eyes searched for only one person. Daddy. Lily ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. He knelt, holding her close, burying his face in her hair. "You okay, baby?" She nodded fiercely. "I knew you could do it." Tears stung David's eyes, but he smiled. "Couldn't have done it without you cheering me on." Behind them, Richard lingered, his face pale, his arrogance deflated. For once, he had no clever remark, no smug smile. He approached slowly, clearing his throat. Miller, is it?" he began awkwardly. I misjudged you. I didn't know." David stood, holding Lily's hand. His gaze was steady but calm. "You didn't need to know. You just needed to respect people, no matter what they look like." Richard swallowed hard, words failing him. For a man who commanded boardrooms with ease, he suddenly felt very small. Lily tilted her head, eyeing him with innocent curiosity. "Were you scared, mister?" Richard hesitated. "Yes, terrified." David rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Sometimes it takes fear to remind us what matters." Richard nodded silently, humbled. Dash dash dash. Later, as David and Lily walked out into the humid Kansas night, emergency lights flashing around them, Lily squeezed his hand. "Daddy." "Yeah, sweetheart. Are you gonna be a pilot again?" David smiled softly. "No, my flying days are over. But I'll always be your pilot. Wherever you need to go." She giggled and hugged him again. And as they disappeared into the crowd of grateful survivors, every passenger carried the same story. The quiet single dad, mocked as nothing, had become everything when it mattered most. At 30,000 feet above America's heartland, he had proven that true worth isn't measured in money, status, or suits, but in courage, love, and the will to protect others.